There is a sign-up sheet for anyone who'd like to address the committee regarding House Bill 411, and that sign-up sheet's right here on the front table. If you haven't signed up, come on up and sign up. We'd love to hear from you today. We are going to be discussing LC 391239S once we get started, and we'll do that in just a minute. But I just wanted to give everybody a chance to sign up if you haven't. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. All right. Welcome, everybody. After much anticipation, we're finally going to get down to discussing House Bill 411. And I'm going to ask Representative Watson to come on around and present the bill. And again, we're looking at LC 391239S is the version in our folders. Is that the correct LC number? Let's see. Is that what you have?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Table's yours. The floor is yours. Whatever you want is yours. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity, finally. I think we've had some good conversation over the summer and had some more good conversation this session so far. So today I bring before you the substitute to HB 411, better known as the truck weight bill, another one of those simple little bills. And we started out, the reason, just to give you some background, if you weren't on the committee last session, we had some certain things that went on in the state last year where some tickets were cited dealing with weights, and I've actually got some of those with me today. And currently under state law, log trucks and the trucks involved in this code section have a 5% variance off the 80, so they're allowed to go to 84,000. Well, these trucks received tickets, fined. Of course, they were over 84,000, but they were cited all the way back to 80,000. So that's what started this conversation. So that's where we began talking about increasing the threshold there, because in the section in this bill that we're talking about, we're dealing with forestry, we're dealing with agriculture. There's a lot of unknowns when they go to the field. We've had a lot of developments and technologies that have changed the way we do business. I know specifically in the peanut industry, we used to use four-wheel wagons, which were very unsafe. They moved slow, pull pins. That whole industry has changed and is now using semi-trailers and commercial trucks to haul peanuts from the field to the buying points. And of course, in the forestry industry is the same. You're in the middle of the woods. So there's a lot of unknowns out there. So that's what brought all this to where we are today. We had a lot of conversations at that 10% and or 84, going to 84,000 pounds with a 5%, which brought us to 88,000. So at the end of the day, after all that, we were just, the study committee met, and through the study committee, they just wanted some try to not have winners and losers, and that's what we got right now. The whole issue of 100,000-pound containers was brought up. They drive all over the state, and they're well over 80,000 pounds. So we do have winners and losers, but also within this code section we had some winners and losers with the radius, and so there was also some folks that were not listed. So we wanted to make sure that we clarified that when we came back to the version that you have now. So really what we've done is on line 16, we've basically just said that we want to, for the point of origin for forest products, we had wood chips and sawdust. We're not included in that section. There again, there's a variability there, wet chips, dry chips, and we wanted to try to include all forest products. We also wanted to specifically list peanuts because that is a new thing now. We're not using four-wheel wagons anymore, and we wanted to list them specifically out. On the back page, we had one section, and we think this is maybe where some of the misinterpretation of the law came from, which is why we just came back to this version. There was two parts here. One part, it was you were fined, including the variance. The variance was allowed. The other part, it was not allowed. So depending on how that situation went down, we just basically said it's all now under one section, including the variance, so that there's no question in there. And that's what we ended. We stayed with the 80,000 gross with a 5% variance. We did go to a 250-mile radius. There again, we had a section in here that had some difference. So we just tried to, I think as Representative Nimmer said, to create some parity in this code section dealing with trucks. And I think that's pretty much it, Mr. Chairman. I'll take any questions.
All right. Questions for the author. Let's see. Is this Mr. Prince? Do you have your button pushed?
Yes.
Okay. I think you may be muted.
Am I on mute?
Try the little button on the back of the.
On the back of the mic.
There we go.
There you go.
That sounds better. Representative Watson, I see, and like I said, around line 35, you went from 100 to 250-mile radius. What's the purpose of that?
Well, we had, as you'll see, we had a 100-mile radius, and then we had a 250-mile radius down on line 42. We just tried to say, let's put everybody on the same playing field and make it all even at 250.
Any other questions for the author? Okay, you don't have any other questions from the committee at this time. We have a sign-up sheet. If we could get that sign-up sheet. Thank you. Chivalry is not dead. Did I hear you complaining about the length of the? Representative Watson, if you want to come on back up, and unless you had anything else you wanted to share with the committee.
I'm good right now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right. All right. Let me see here. Let me hear. Let's. What I'm going to try to do is as much as possible, to the extent I know. And we should have put this on the list perhaps, but I'm going to ask folks who I think are in favor of the legislation. I'm going to try to call on you first, and then we'll hear from folks who may be opposed to the legislation after that. So let's start with Mike Giles from Georgia Poultry Federation. And I don't mean to pigeonhole anybody. If you've changed your opinion on it, feel free to let us know. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mike Giles. I'm president of the Georgia Poultry Federation. We're a trade association that represents the poultry industry in Georgia, which is poultry processors, poultry growers, and allied industry. And Georgia is the nation's leading broiler-producing state. According to the University of Georgia, poultry industry contributes over $25 billion to the state's economy annually, and the jobs of more than 100,000 Georgians depend on the industry either directly or indirectly. I'd like to provide comments in three areas, which will hopefully give the committee a better understanding of our viewpoint on this issue. The three areas are competitiveness, sustainability, road wear, and safety. First, becoming more competitive. It might not seem logical that such a small increase in the allowed gross vehicle weight could make such a difference. We're talking about 2 tons in this scenario. Well, I'll just talk about the difference between 84,000 and 88,000. That's the same as an average size passenger vehicle. But the reason is volume. The poultry industry currently makes 1.14 million trips annually to and from farms, delivering feeds and chickens. If each truck were to haul 2 additional tons, the trip number would be reduced by almost 100,000, or 8.8%. This translates to overall cost associated with lowering costs associated with transportation, as well as less fossil fuels used, lower CO2 and other emissions, and fewer tires to dispose of. In other words, a more sustainable system from an economic and environmental standpoint due to a more efficient use of resources. Second, road wear. The poultry industry will haul the same amount of feed regardless of what the truck weight allowed is in state law. That's really dictated by our customers and supply and demand. In rough numbers, we can either haul this same amount of chickens and feed in 1.1 million trips or 1 million trips. Same payload weight, but fewer trips. If the industry were to double in size at some point in the future, and our trucks were to each carry 2 additional tons, then we'd make 1.8 million trips instead of 2 million trips. A study conducted by the Agricultural Technology Research Program at Georgia Tech Research Institute illustrates a road wear offset that would occur. This study uses a model that is based on Georgia's current production levels in poultry and equipment used. An 84,000 pound scenario was compared to an 88,000 pound scenario. The finding was that the reduced number of trip offsets road wear in such a way that there's only a 2% difference between the 84,000 and 88,000 scenarios on a 20-year lifespan road. Third, safety. Concerns about road wear are important, but not as important as the safety of our drivers and other motorists on the road. Producing safe food for our customers and creating a safe working environment for our employees is a top priority of Federation members. One thing I think that everyone can agree on is a truck that doesn't leave its home base is not going to be involved in an accident. A 9% reduction in trips means that every 11th truck stays home. It doesn't travel down 2-lane roads, crosses over bridges, through interchanges or over rail crossings. Less exposure means less of an opportunity for accidents regardless of the cause. The Federation has a number of members that operate in Georgia and also in states where there are higher limits, 88,000 in Alabama, for example, 90,000 in North Carolina. We thought that if we could get a large enough sample size from these members that operate similar type operations, same safety programs and so forth in each state, that surely we'd see some type of trends emerge. And the concern is a heavier vehicle might cause the incidence of accidents and also incidents of injuries to increase. So we collected DOT recordable accident data over a 3-year period in December 2005. A DOT recordable accident is one in which an injury or fatality occurs or when one of the vehicles involved must be towed from the scene. Each participating company provided this data, and the sample size represents almost 57 million miles traveled. No trend emerged, which when we evaluated the data, no trend emerged which indicated that the accident rate was higher in North Carolina with the higher allowed weight than in Georgia. In fact, the accident injury rate in North Carolina, where the maximum allowed weight is 90,000 pounds, was lower in Georgia per million miles traveled. Thankfully, there were no fatalities in the 57 million miles traveled. Truck technology has evolved significantly over the past few decades. Brakes are more efficient, and federal brake standards have increased over the years. Technology and fleet safety programs have improved over time and will continue to do so in the future. What was considered to be a safe weight in 1970s technology might be different than what is considered safe with today's truck technology. And just to close, there's been a lot of discussion about braking distance as a factor in safety. One thing to keep in mind is that today's modern brakes are designed to operate under load. To illustrate this, I'll read a section from the Georgia Commercial Driver's Manual. This is quoting, "The heavier the vehicle, the more work the brakes must do to stop it, and the more heat they absorb. But the brakes, tires, springs, and shock absorbers on heavy vehicles are designed to work best when the vehicle is fully loaded. Empty trucks require greater stopping distances because an empty vehicle has less traction." Well, just to close, we believe that when the facts are considered, and they're valid concerns on both sides, we believe that increasing the maximum allowed gross weight is a reasonable policy that is good for Georgia's economy. Thank you for allowing me to share our viewpoint. I'll answer any questions that you might have in the committee.
Thank you. Representative Al Williams.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, my bifocals wasn't working. While I do enjoy what you haul down the road, for the record,
Yes, sir.
you helped me with this, 'cause this kind of got by me. When it makes sense, but you're telling me that an empty truck is safer than a loaded truck. You said that the traction's better, the brakes are designed to do a better job when it's loaded. And that comes out to about what I said.
Yeah.
Just kind of go back through that science a little bit.
Yeah. So today's brakes are designed to work most efficiently when the truck is loaded. When the truck is unloaded, and especially in a bobtail situation where there is no trailer, or when the trailer is light and unloaded, when you're in an emergency braking situation, there can be loss of control and less traction. I'm not saying that a loaded trailer or unloaded trailer, one is more safe than the other. And actually what I was actually the source and what I was reading from is just from the Georgia Commercial Driver's Manual, which I think is what they use to train commercial drivers, tractor trailer drivers today in the state.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And I'm trying. So, have you done any studies? What 4,000 pounds, 2 tons? Is there an increase in braking distance, or is it about the same?
I don't know I really don't know the answer to that. Braking is one thing to think about in
Speed
braking.
And everything else.
There's a lot of factors there, but at certain speeds, the braking distance. A big part of braking distance there's really 3 factors. First is perception, realizing that there's danger, and then there's reaction time. And then there's actual braking time. At certain speeds, the perception and reaction time can be half or more of the total stopping time from braking, from the perception of the risk until to the actual stopping. So there are other factors involved in braking. I don't know how much the small difference in weight would matter, honestly. Mm-hmm. I've looked for that, but it's such a small amount that the actual braking distance there are other factors that are larger.
Thank you. Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much. This is kind of 101 for me with regard to trucking, so thank you for your patience. What are the federal guidelines? Are there not federal guidelines that determine the maximum number of pounds on the interstate highways?
There are interstate, and just to be clear, Georgia cannot pass a law that will supersede the federal on the interstate. So this would only apply if there were an increase in the allowable gross vehicle weight through Georgia law. It wouldn't affect interstate. So it would still be 80,000.
So
there is a proposal, though. There have been discussions at the federal level to increase to 90,000 with an additional axle.
And these brakes that you were describing as being regulated for certain loads,
Yes, ma'am.
are they regulated to manage more than 80,000 pounds?
There is a federal braking standard for vehicles that are sold, and it prescribes how at a speed of varying speeds, including I believe 60 miles an hour and above, and I believe at 85,000 and above. I can get you the standard, but I believe the distance that brakes are required to perform and stop at within 310 feet, I believe, is at the higher weights.
Can I ask one little follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So, just in terms of the number of pounds on a single axle, I mean, we know these loads are not distributed equally. I mean, what is the maximum amount that would be allowed on any single axle?
The statute has that, and then the current is, I believe, 46,000 for a tandem, 23,000 for single axles.
And that's with a permit?
No, ma'am. Currently,
that's without a permit.
Currently, there is, and I believe as a substitute, as I understand it, the substitute does not include a weight increase. This is a discussion about weight increases. This is what we've studied for the last year, so we thought it's an opportunity for the full committee to hear this discussion. But the original bill, I believe, had a permit structure, and if I'm correct, this substitute does not. It's just an amendment of current law.
So is this bill a reflection of what the committee that I was not able to participate in? Is it a reflection of that study committee? Are these the recommendations from the study committee? I guess is my question.
I would leave that to the author of the bill.
Well, let me jump in just a second.
Okay.
Certainly, the provisions that are being discussed are in the LC version before us, and you look at lines 12 through 14, and it talks about the single and tandem axle weight limits.
Mm-hmm.
And we will hear from other witnesses who can talk about braking distances and some of the more technical aspects. So if there are no other questions for Mr. Giles, then I'm going to let him step down. One second. All right.
Thank you.
Chairman Sims.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. I am, too, a novice in the trucking and hauling industry. But help me to understand this. We're talking about a fully loaded truck and safety. An empty truck, if it hits you, is certainly not going to have the same impact as a fully loaded, heavy truck. Am I right?
I think there's so many. I don't know how
variables.
to. I think a head-on collision with two passenger vehicles so these trucks unloaded can weigh anywhere from 35 to 50,000 pounds at the tare weight. So
that's what I'm thinking. They're not immune to hurting you if they're unloaded, but if they are loaded, it would appear.
I don't know. I haven't seen any studies comparing the severity of a 50,000
Right.
pound
I just
vehicle.
wondered if you had looked at that impact.
It would both certainly be severe.
And let me jump in one more time again, Chairman Sims. I do think we'll have witnesses who can address those technical aspects a little later on.
Thank you so
Any
much.
other questions for Mr. Giles? All right.
Thank you, Mr.
All right. Next up, I have Andres Villegas. With Georgia Forestry Association.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to address the committee this afternoon. My name is Andres Villegas, and I represent the Georgia Forestry Association, and I'm here today in support of House Bill 411. And this bill, in its current state, will be helpful to the efficient movement of forest products throughout the state, including chips, sawdust, and shavings. In addition, this bill provides for overweight penalties to begin at 84,000 pounds, items that our members are supportive of. The Georgia Forestry Association has over 2,000 members across the state and represents the entire supply chain in the forest products industry. This includes landowners, nurseries, consultants, pulp mills, paper mills, sawmills, loggers, haulers, wood dealers, as well as engineered wood products mills. It's important that this committee also is clear that the Georgia Forestry Association is also supportive of the previous language in the bill that allows for the truck weight increases up to 88,000 pounds. This increase is important to address the competitive disadvantage that Georgia landowners, mills, wood dealers, and loggers have compared to our neighbors in Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee, who are all at 88,000 pounds, and North Carolina, who's at 90,000 pounds. Every load of logs that crosses the state lines, either coming in or out of Georgia, is at this disadvantage, a 5% disadvantage. I would like to thank Representative Chad Nimmer for the work he did with the study committee on truck weights that was held last year. During that process, we had the opportunity to hear from the Georgia Department of Transportation about the potential posting of bridges back to 56,000 pounds. That is a major issue for our members. And we heard anywhere from 240-ish bridges all the way up to 586 bridges throughout from the hearing that we had last week, as well as going back into the hearings last year. And so having clarity on that is of absolute importance to our members throughout the state. The posting of a bridge can cause a rerouting of trucks and reduce the payments to, or the value of the timber to the landowner. And that's a big deal for the 24 million acres of land across the state and 600,000 landowners. That can have a major impact. So we definitely encourage the ability to have greater clarity on that point. Safety is a top priority for the forest products industry. We believe that a 2-ton increase will not negatively impact safety due to the reduction of 6 to 8% of log trucks on the road, and the fact that 88,000 pounds is still well within the braking standards of trucks. Please keep in mind that 2 tons is approximately the size of the weight of half the weight of a full-size Ford truck, or equal to the weight of a Toyota Prius, to give you a measure of comparison. Why now? Well, forestry is a $29 billion industry in the state that not only provides that level of direct economic activity, but also underpins the clean air, the clean water, wildlife, and outdoor recreation that Georgians depend on. This legislation, as previously proposed, is vital to ensuring the regional and international competitiveness of the industry that simply brings forestry trucks up to the standards of neighboring states, while still remaining well below the 100,000 pounds limit afforded international shipments. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Villegas? You have no questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Emily Ham with West Rock and Georgia Paper and Forestry Products Association.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Transportation Committee. My name is Emily Ham. I'm with the West Rock Company. I'm also here on behalf of the Georgia Paper and Forest Products Association. Just to reiterate, some of y'all may have been familiar with Rock 10. Last time I presented to the committee last year, Rock 10 merged with me, West Bayco, last year. So just a little background on the name change so you're familiar with us. I'm here on behalf of the 12 member manufacturing companies that make up GPFPA, and I believe 13 paper mills right now that we're currently covering across the state, including dozens of box plants, recycling plants, folding carton, forest, lumber products, you name it. We certainly commend the Special Study Committee and the staff that have dedicated their time and resources to engaging in a very meaningful dialogue on behalf of our industry. We agree that the state should continue to seek out safe and strategic solutions that will increase productivity in transportation. We appreciate that the substitute provides clarity in the movement of forest products from the point of marketing or processing, as well as the uniformity it's going to provide for law enforcement of these overweight vehicles. It is important that Georgia address the current disadvantage with neighboring states that allow trucks to carry at least 88,000 pounds on their roadways, state highways specifically. Our members are concerned that the trucking capacity crisis that currently exists across the country today will certainly put us at a competitive disadvantage as we move our goods both in-state and across state lines. Capacity constraints are extraordinarily tight with the aging workforce of truckers, and the demand for truck shipment is outpacing truck availability. Based on data gathered from our members' forest products facilities in the state and across the line on state borders, increasing the maximum truck weight to 88,000 pounds will reduce our truck hauls by 6 to 8%. This equates to easily conservative 10,000 fewer truck trips required to haul the same amount of weight to our paper mills. Just to put it in perspective, a basic mill that's running at full capacity, you're looking at 400, 500 plus easily truck trips per day per mill. That's every single day, 365 days a year. So next time you guys are driving around some of our forest areas, keep that in mind when you see these log trucks. The bill, as we've discussed in the past, promotes efficiency in the movement of unfinished products to manufacturing facilities, and enacting this legislation will certainly result in fewer truck trips required to haul those materials. We feel that any damage that would be caused to road surfaces would be largely mitigated by the reduction in truck traffic. This legislation will enhance efficiency and establish parity across state lines, as currently Florida, Alabama, and Tennessee recognize an 88,000-pound maximum truck weight limit. This puts Georgia's trucking for our forest products at a competitive disadvantage in that we are certainly hauling less than other states allow us to do once we cross those state lines. We feel that increasing our maximum in the future will put us on par with the neighboring states, continue to secure existing jobs, and enhance the state's economic development. Again, I certainly echo the comments that our friends at the Poultry Federation and the Forestry Association have shared. I'm happy to try and answer any questions that anyone may have, and I'll give it back to you.
All right. Any questions from any members of the committee for Ms. Ham? You don't have any questions?
Excellent.
Thank you very much. All right. I'm going to try to make sure we capture all of the folks who are here to speak in favor of the bill. Is there anyone who's signed up, or maybe you haven't signed up, who'd like to speak in favor of the bill that we haven't talked to or heard from yet? Anybody else? Okay. Then what I'd like to do is start with Colonel McDonough and Major Jones from the Department of Public Safety, because I think they can help address some of these technical questions that members have had, and we can kind of get a handle on some of that stuff before we move on any further into the issue.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Good afternoon.
How y'all doing?
Good.
One of the things that was brought up already, Mr. Al, specific to your question, brake efficiency and stopping distance are two different things. He was accurate when he talked about the engineering of a braking system under a load. It will work more efficiently under load, but that doesn't mean that a heavier truck is going to stop under load in a shorter distance. That's just not the case. In fact, if we took an 80,000-pound truck and we, under the same circumstance, were to go out there and stop it and mark that position, anybody here want to stand on that mark when I put another 4,000 pounds on it and do the same thing? Do I have any takers? Little common sense. You add weight to a truck, regardless of the braking system and the efficiency, it's going to take a farther distance for it to stop. So if you're that person that stopped at the red light, or you're in that traffic zone on the interstate, or you're that child that's on the bicycle, you don't want to be on that spot with 4,000 pounds more. So I hope that answers the difference between braking efficiency and braking distance. One of the things that's in the bill that concerns me, and my concern is for the safety of the motoring public. So in the existing substitute, we talk about taking a certain class of trucks and going from 100 miles to 250 miles of distance that they can travel. Now let's talk about the impact. What is the distance of 100 miles? That's from the state line south of Valdosta to Cordele. Now we're going to make that impact from the state line down in Valdosta to exit 249D down here at Pine Street at the connector. So we're going to take a vehicle of that weight and that class with a poor safety record, and we're going to put it on not 100 miles of roadway, we're going to potentially put it on 250 miles of roadway. So I understand the reasons why. I understand that within the industry, sometimes a particular location can only take so much. They have a limit. And if you've got a product to deliver and there's someplace a little farther, it would be nice to be able to go a little farther. But we're taking that distance and we're increasing it by 2.5 times. And so now for that state route and for those local routes, 2.5 times more potentially can be impacted by the weight of those vehicles on the roadway. What is the difference in kinetic energy? One of the things that was asked here, what does it mean when we add 2 tons, just 4,000 pounds? When a vehicle that weighs 3,000 pounds is traveling at 60 miles per hour, if it hits something, the kinetic energy is 360 foot-pounds. Now let's take that truck that weighs 80,000 pounds. It's now 9.6 million foot-pounds of kinetic energy. So you take an extra 4,000 pounds on top of that, and it's about another 500,000 pounds of kinetic energy. So although 2 tons, just 4,000 pounds, once again, do you want to be the car that stopped at the stop sign or stopped in the work zone, or the child that's on the bicycle and it's just 4,000 pounds? So there is a significant difference in kinetic energy when you go from that passenger vehicle and you go to that large truck. You go 26 times more of kinetic energy. I'd like the batter that could bat on my team that could increase his kinetic energy of the ball by 26 times. We've also heard fewer truck trips, and I get the math, but the assumption is in a static environment, and our poultry man did talk about increases. But my experience in life is that our infrastructure, to the most part, doesn't stay up with our need. We see it every time we sit in the Jimmy Carter Boulevard parking lot and wish we had more infrastructure to move along. So in the 20 some odd years that I've been in this business, we've seen our state's population almost double. We've seen those vehicle miles traveled increased. So anytime you talk about increasing the weight of vehicles on the roadway for the motoring public safety, I'm against it. Period. I'm against it. Hopefully that answers maybe some of the questions that you have. I know that addresses a lot of things, Representative Watson, that aren't particularly in this bill, but there were questions that were asked. So the concern that I would have that's specific to this is taking another commodity and putting it in trucks and allowing it to have 80,000 pounds on the roadway and increasing that distance from what seems to me from 100 to 250, a broad jump in my opinion. And I think it'll have a negative impact not only on the infrastructure but the safety of the motor vehicle public.
You have a question. I believe it's Representative Hitchens. Is that right? Representative. Oh, sorry about that. Who raised their hand?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the review of my high school physics. I was a little rusty. I heard the sponsor of the bill mention something about inappropriate citations. It sounds like there were some issues with citations that were issued that were inappropriate. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, ma'am. I think if there would be a review of that citation, the nuance would be is in the old bill where the law is existing, it's the initial point. I think you would see in those citations it would be a subsequent point. It's not confusing to us in that the law specifically stated or states that the initial point, that if it's over that variance, it's 5 cents per pound. But if you go outside of what that is, then it doesn't go to the variance, it goes back to the original amount. So that's the only nuance that might be different, and we'd be happy to take a look at them. And the issue is with us is that any time that we issue those, the person that gets a citation issued for those weight automatically is allowed an appeal to review to make sure that we get it right.
So you're working with the industry on the citation.
Absolutely.
And educating them on what your interpretation
We always like to do it on the front end. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on what you just said about someone making an appeal, are these citations the same citations we'd see on any other kind of traffic citation where a person gets they're scheduled for a hearing in court when they get the ticket, or is this something different, a different process?
No, sir. Anything that's in the Title 40 code or it's specific to conduct for operating the vehicle is a misdemeanor traffic offense. These are civil penalties and can go before an appeal with the administrative court that we use.
Okay. Any other questions for Colonel McDonough? No other questions. Major Jones? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Prince.
I don't know if it's so much of a question, but it is a question I asked during the study committee piece, and maybe you were able to answer it. I understand from testimony that we're right now our poultry and peanuts and wherever carriers are sort of at a disadvantage going in and out of state based on other states that are allowing more weight than we do. Now, that being said, when those trucks from other states come through the state of Georgia carrying more weight, is that not I mean, how do we deal with that?
They have to comply with our standards.
So whether they unload and then at a weight station? I'm just trying to picture this. If they're carrying...
Yeah, anything over 6,000 pounds, they have to unload it.
Okay.
Can you explain that? What do you mean when you say anything over 6,000 pounds they have to unload? What does that mean?
If a vehicle's over, and a lot of times we escort the vehicle to a safer place. If the vehicle is 6,000 pounds over its allotted weight, then they have to unload that 6,000 pounds off to another vehicle.
But right now, we're talking 4,000.
There or a safer location. Yes.
Representative Prince, go ahead.
Okay, but now for, I think this bill, we're talking an additional 4,000.
I believe the substitute doesn't increase the weight at all. The substitute only increases the mileage from 100 to 250.
Okay.
Let me see if I think we're just getting a little confused, getting wrapped around the axle a little bit here. Thank you.
Which one, the tandem or the
tango? Thank you very much. I think the confusion is you're saying that if a truck comes into the state and our standard is 80,000 pounds, and they have a 5% variance potentially, depending on whether or not they qualify for this variance in the code, even if they had the variance up to 84,000 pounds, if they had 84,001 pound, you'd cite them and send them on. But if they had 86,001 pounds, you'd escort them somewhere to stop and take part of the load off. Is that what you're saying?
Most of the time, yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Who we have here? Representative Jordan.
Real quickly, how do you write them a citation like you write for speeding, or how do you do that?
We do it by electronic citation. We enter the axle weights and it computes a fine, and we give them a copy of it, and they mail or send the fine in, and then they're granted an appeal if they feel like they have been wrongly cited. But it's a civil assessment, doesn't count on their driver's license.
Is there a special court of appeal?
Administrative court, yes, sir.
Are they located all over Georgia?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Whatever region the citation is issued in is where the court will take place.
Oh, regions, okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
We
Thank
have
you.
9 geographic regions in Georgia.
Thank you.
And to that point, one of the things that we heard was an impetus for this bill is that there was some unequal application, that there may have been some confusion about how the citation should be written, whether it should go back to the 80,000 pounds or whether it should go back to 84,000 pounds. In your experience, have you seen a disparity of application within the agency? And if so, what have you done to address that?
The way the applicability of the law is, let's just say, for instance, he meets the condition of the variance, which is he's allowed 84,000 on gross. Let's say he gets a citation, or his weight is 84,001 pounds. The citation is 5 cents. We don't issue 5-cent citations. We normally give 1,000 pounds. But he is not taken back to 80,000. Now, if he doesn't meet that variance, and for example, if he's at a second point of marketing, he wouldn't qualify for it anyway. So he's always taken back to 84 if he meets the conditions of the variance.
What does that mean when you say if he's at the second point of marketing?
The way the law reads is that the variance is given at the first point of marketing or processing. In years past, when the law was first changed and it came up to a nickel a pound for weight violations, it did take them back to 80,000. I can't remember the author of that legislation, but I believe it was the following year a bill was put in, changed the law to where we take them back to 84,000 if they meet the condition of the variance.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative Watson, what's your number down there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Major Jones, you provided some information on accidents for me, and I appreciate that. And I just want to make sure I understand it. You've got it broken out. There was over 41,530 accidents on our interstates and non-interstates from 2012 to 2015. Does that number sound? And of those accidents, my little math here, and I didn't do good math at school, but there's 776 accidents in that same time period that were farm or construction vehicles or log trucks.
And it's the way it's classified on the crash reports. It's hard to break it down by specific class a lot of times, but that's correct. And you're not going to see many log trucks on the interstate legally anyway because of the 34,000-pound tandem limit. So where most of your crashes are going to happen with a log truck is going to be on your state routes and county and city streets.
Okay.
And one thing that personally I believe is the reason we haven't seen more is they have been limited pretty much to that 100 miles rather than that 250 miles.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. No other questions. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to call Joe Arbona from Genesee and Wyoming.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name again is Joe Arbona, and I represent Genesee and Wyoming Railroads. We actually operate 11 short-line railroads here in the state of Georgia, and those railroads happen to be the Chattooga and Chickamauga Railway, the Chattahoochee Industrial Railroad, the First Coast Railroad, the Hilton and Albany Railroad, the Georgia Central Railway, the Golden Isles Terminal Railroad, the Golden Isles Terminal Wharf, the Georgia Southwestern Railroad, the Riceboro Southern Railway, the Savannah Port Terminal, and the Valdosta Railway. We operate about 600 miles of track around the state, and I'm here to represent our company and our railroads and also our 200 employees who provide short-line rail service to customers throughout the state. We are an extremely safe company. We're one of the safest railroads in the country. We serve customers and communities across the state and who depend on very safe, reliable rail service. And we want to be able to continue to serve your state and being economic development and job creation catalysts that we are by providing that type of service to customers in the state. As such, I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all today and to inform you that our railroads strongly oppose HB 411 and the introduced substitute bill. These bills threaten Georgia railroads, their employees' jobs, economic development, and job creation in the state. The proposed weight increase will have the following negative effects. It will give trucks an unfair advantage over short-line railroads because the roads that trucks are maintained, the trucks use are maintained by tax dollars, while short-line railroads, for the most part, are maintained by private capital. The distortion of market pricing and subsequent diversion of freight has been recognized in many studies, including a 2008 Government Accountability Office study that found a clear cost distortion against rail and water transportation through increased truck size and weight limits. This study is based on the most recent available U.S. Department of Transportation truck size and weight study that found that a 100,000-pound truck is covering only 40% of the damage it causes to roadway networks, including not just roadways but also bridges. In fact, the U.S. Department of Transportation last year conducted a study of truck size and weight increases to determine whether they should allow for increased sizes and weights across the interstate system federally, and found that the information was inconclusive and they could not recommend any changes to increase size or weights of trucks across the country.
Let me interrupt just a second.
Please.
Did you say that the federal regulators did not recommend changes because they didn't have adequate information, or because they had information that recommended there should be no change?
The information that they couldn't gather enough information to see what the level of damage would be. Now, in the past, they've looked at some of the problems that it would cause, but they could not recommend to Congress to increase the current truck size and weight.
Okay. You've got a question from Representative Al Williams.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I've listened very closely to you, and correct me if I'm wrong. Yours is not about the safety, the racks, the braking. Yours is strictly, you don't think it's fair competition. You don't want anybody else hauling anything additionally. And that's the only way I could phrase it.
Well, in all fairness, our short line railroads are railroads that operate very small line segments that connect to the bigger railroads. In some cases, it could be just 10 miles, 20 miles that connect businesses to the big networks that go throughout the country and internationally. So our margins of profit are very, very small. The loss of one customer on one of those lines could make us have to mothball and walk away from the lines. And that would be a major challenge for us. And unfortunately, it would be a major challenge for industry within those areas, because by losing rail, you lose a competitive option to trucking. And so from our standpoint, again, the unfair I guess in a way, subsidy of trucks by allowing them to be heavier would pose a very, very serious problem to those smaller railroads like ours, which work independently. Each one of them has to grow its own business and be sustainable from a customer standpoint and be able to maintain and support them with private capital.
Okay, well, final question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
One of those lines in my district, Riceboro Railroad, primarily out of SNF, I believe, that they haul. But, you know, I understand your short margins, but correct me if I'm wrong, not one of the short lines, one of the most profitable railroads in America? I just heard that, you know, I know how people blow things up, but...
No, not necessarily. In some cases, you could have some lines that are very profitable. In other cases, you have some lines that are not very profitable.
Oh, I just didn't want to think that yours was suffering, because they haul a little white-looking dirt. It makes a little money over there, too.
Well, I mean, it depends on short lines, and I'm speaking here about ours in particular. I mean, some of them, again, are very profitable, others not so much. In fact, I deal with some situations where, again, the loss of one customer out of 4 that maybe one of these short lines has is, well, 25% of your customer base, and that could be very detrimental, and unfortunately, that's what heavier trucks could do.
Okay.
Representative Watson.
I just want to follow up on Representative Williams a little bit. How are y'all paid? Are you paid by weight or by unit, or how do you collect your fees from your customers?
Well, we have arrangements with some of the Class 1 railroads that serve customers. So it's just different types of arrangements. It could be a contract. It could be through a tariff. Various options.
Would it be a per pound contract or a per unit contract?
It depends. It could be.
Could be. Mm-hmm. So technically, you could benefit from more weight getting to your tracks.
Well,
to point A to point B.
In some cases, our railroads actually operate on, also limited weights, because maybe they don't have the capacity to go to a heavier standard, just because the lines are so old. They had been, in many cases, over the years, going through deferred maintenance, and we've been trying to grow them and fix them as fast as we can. When we took over some of these lines, they were just not in the best of shape. So the weight limits on those could be a problem too.
Well, I think the trucking industry is having those same problems too. So.
Well, we maintain our infrastructure, and of course, when it comes to trucking, our concern is that in a way it's an indirect subsidy, or a direct subsidy, I should say, for our competitors.
Any other questions for Mr. Arbona? All right, Mr. Arbona, I know you had you were still reading through your notes. I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind to, if you have some other information that you could provide to the committee members, if you could email that to me, and I'll make sure the members get it. We will not be taking a vote on this afternoon, but in an effort to get as many people through the process today as possible, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up and let us go to the next person.
Well, I appreciate that, Chairman. I will provide that information. One very quick point I do want to share is that
Sure.
these short-line railroads are critical to economic development and job creation in this state, and in all states. I mean, if you let one of these lines go away, the challenge will be that there will not be rail service where some of these new industries would like to look for locations that are rail-served, and if they don't find a railroad there, they'll look someplace else. So these are great economic development catalysts, and we can't let them go away and reduce competition by letting them go. So thank you again for the opportunity, and I will provide those studies and information to you via email. So thank you again.
Very much. All right. Let's see here. How about Todd Edwards from ACCG?
Mr. Chairman, I have a few handouts.
Yes, please.
Set them right here on the end.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Todd Edwards with the Association County Commissioners of Georgia, and I have with me Mr. Chaz Cannon, who's the county administrator in Colquitt County. I'm going to cut to the chase today. I know that there's been a lot of expert testimony already provided. I think I wanted to be stated that ACCG, we certainly appreciate the fine work, the economic impact, and the jobs of our poultry industry, agriculture, timber, concrete, solid waste, and paper, and other proponents of this bill. I think we have a strong record of working with these industries and members of the General Assembly to come to consensus on many issues of concern or, that they were interested in over the years. The CUVA, Forest Land Protection Act, and GATE, all of which have had a significant impact on the revenues and the bottom line of the resources of our counties. However, we have to come to the table. When it comes to truck weight increase limit, or truck weight limit increases, however, we remain opposed. We do so for various reasons. I'll state the broad reasons. I know a lot of specifics have been talked about, but the risk of severe accidents due to longer stopping distances, that's been covered. Public safety and emergency response costs to county governments, including proper equipment to quickly and safely remove an upright heavier trucks, or the rapid deterioration of local roads and bridge infrastructure. I did want to note currently there are under 1,500 bridges that are posted in the state of Georgia. Once they're posted, it causes all sorts of traffic to go around. It's a great cost of local governments to maintain them. And of the handout, I guess the issue we're talking about today, what is an additional 4,000 pounds? What is an additional 150 more miles? What is changing it from unfinished wood products to finished products? And on its face, each and every time we see a bill up at the General Assembly, it may be insignificant, it may be greatly significant. But what I wanted to point out in the chart in front of you, each one of these alone may not make a huge, great impact on Georgia roads. However, when taken cumulatively, and if you looked at the changes from 1968 to 2015, including 10 law changes and several more attempts in the past years, this increase, these variances, these distances, these radius, they add up. And they have a real significant impact on county roads, which I will remind, and I believe it was stated earlier in committee, are built to handle 56,000 pounds. The interstate system can handle 80,000 pounds. The question was asked earlier what the limit was there. Since it can only add 80, any increase above the 80,000 pounds, including the 5% variances that are already in law, means that these trucks have to stay strictly on state and county roads. And even if they were to stay on state roads, they need to get in and off, for all the economic development reasons mentioned, through mostly county road system. So in general, it's not just one bill, it's not just two, but year after year, we're seeing cumulative impact of ever-increasing truck weight limits on county roads, and quite frankly, we can't take any more at the county level. I think the specifics in this bill have already been discussed. I'll address a few of them. The current law, the forestry products, the exemption to logs, unfinished forestry applies to forest where cut to the first point of marketing and processing. The latest proposal in front of you not only adds wood chips and pellets, but it also appears to include any finished wood product made from wood, including furniture, lumber. I think it's going to have dramatically increased the scope of the 80,000 exemption, increasing it to a 250-mile radius will also have a great impact. I'll sum up, and I'm going to refer to Chaz here in a moment because he knows a lot more about the impacts on our roads than I do. But any future increase on weight limits in Georgia, I think we need to look at increasing the fines and enforcement measures to accompany these increases. Currently, as mentioned earlier, the Department of Public Safety has the authority to enforce and inspect truck weight violations. We should consider allowing local governments to do this once again. And I think the state already provides a significant benefit by allowing the 80,000 pound weights again on county roads, which are only rated for 56,000 pounds. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks. And go ahead, please.
As Mr. Edwards said, I'm Chaz Cannon from Colquitt County. Perhaps you may have heard of our football team. First, just let me say,
I'm from Cartersville. Perhaps you've heard of mine.
He got me on that. I'll just say that I'm sensitive to this issue.
Now, the football or the truck weights? I'll be nice on either one, so you just tell me which one. Go ahead.
Been involved in agriculture and timber for many years. In fact, I'm a member of several agencies and organizations that support this legislation. I also live about a mile from 32 poultry houses, and so I see on a daily basis the amount and type of vehicles it takes to operate and successfully operate these industries. In my current position as county administrator, but I've got a few concerns about the legislation, and most of those have to deal with financial issues. Based on what our current projections are for our county resurfacing of county roads in Colquitt County, the amount of resurfacing costs today already exceeds available funds by about $11 million. This is largely due based on analysis from our Road and Bridge Department to heavy truck traffic. For example, we have 3 roads, C.S. Powell, Matthews Road, and Bluebird Road. Combined are about 5.44 miles. Both these roads, all 3 of the roads, are located near poultry operation plants or poultry houses or a large timber track where they cut timber periodically. Matthews Road needs to be reclaimed. Last year we had to shut down about a half-mile section of Matthews Road for about a month or so to resurface the road because of the timber operation and the logging trucks damaged the road, made it impassable. So about 5.44 miles of combined roads from those 3 roads, and the estimated cost for reclamation and for resurfacing is $962,000. Our annual LMIG allocation from the state is about $800,000. So for these 5.44 miles, it would be more than our annual LMIG allocation, which I know would hopefully will increase after HB 170. But that's a pretty significant impact to our cost as a county for resurfacing. Bottom line is that our current road conditions just can't support the current weights. They just weren't built for it. Now we are moving to a soil cement base with super pave asphalt, which should help. The DOT we have a better mix that we are making our roads better with to withstand the heavier truck traffic. But that's going to take some time and it's going to take some money. So we need to lay the foundation first before we consider moving to higher weights, in my opinion. So if this exacerbates the road conditions by allowing more vehicles with heavier weights, then I'm inclined to basically resist that because it will reduce the condition of our roads. We all support the industry of agriculture and timber. It's very important to Colquitt County. We're zoned about 90% ag. Those are local jobs, local industries. We don't want to drive them away by increasing local taxes to pay for the resurfacing of all the county roads or lose them to somebody else because of our road network is such degraded that we're not able to compete with other areas. The key to this is funding. It's a big concern of mine. We have a large exemption for CUVA. Last year was $2.59 million exemption for CUVA. We don't have a lost. The school board, the Board of Education in our county gets the lost. So all we have is a SPLOST. We do plan on voting on a T-SPLOST in 2017. So hopefully with the additional LMIG money, with a T-SPLOST in 2017 and with another round of SPLOST, we might be in a position to be able to resurface our roads and get them up to speed. But at this time, we just don't have that particular revenue. And I'll be subject to any questions you might have.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have one question. Going back and Mr. Edwards, you brought up the change to line 16 where we're striking the words forest where cut to the first and then adding in the words point of origin to the final point of marketing. My question is really about something that isn't changed in the bill, and you may know the answer or council may help us with the answer. Do we have forest products defined anywhere? I looked at this code section and didn't see forest products defined in the code section itself. Is there a definition in the section or in the chapter that anybody's aware of that defines forest products? It's also not defined in the annotation, so I don't think the courts have taken up that question either. But I'm just wondering if forest products really is as broad as some people have indicated, that you may have indicated today, Mr. Edwards, and others have indicated to me also. Is there? We don't have that. Let me go to. Did you want to address my question, or did you? Okay, all right.
My read on it, and again, I'm not an attorney, if I would gladly stand to be corrected, is a forest product, it would include more than the unfinished, and so it would include all that. Now, I could be wrong, and admittedly, I've had trouble, just as many of y'all had, keeping up with all the versions of this bill. I mean, we had one, and we try to call on the experts. I try to get the attorneys and get specific examples, but from the bill that was introduced to the substitute which was passed, to everything studied in the study committee, to this which I got over the weekend, admittedly, I've had trouble, and I'm sure many of you had, keeping track of different versions of the bills, what they applied to and what not. If I'm incorrect in that, I will stand corrected, but admittedly, I have had trouble.
Well, I'm not trying to say you are incorrect, but I've heard different opinions about what that term means, and so to the extent we could find some definitive answer to what forest products includes, that would be helpful, I think. So, yes, sir. Mr. Watson.
If I can add to that, maybe too, or what about raw forest products? Is that defined in code anywhere? Do we need to?
Well, the only thing I'm referring to is in line 16. It just says hauling forest products from, and with the proposed change will be hauling forest products from the point of origin to the final point of marketing or processing. So I'm trying to nail down what that means exactly. You know, I heard somebody make the comment that, well, that would mean you could include furniture from the factory, and I don't think that's the intention of the language, and I would hope that's not what the meaning would be. But so a definition would be helpful.
Agreed.
That's why I asked.
Follow up.
Yes, please.
Don't the counties receive some kind of, I think it's a P283 or some kind of severance tax from the timber industry when trees are harvested that goes directly to the counties?
Yes, we do. Two things in that. I believe in the hearings, and if it wasn't in Dublin, it was stated, I believe by the industry, that $14 million in timber tax revenue was collected in 2012. Dividing that up by county, that's about 88,000 a county, and I'm not sure how much road miles 88,000 would cover in resurfacing or brand new pavement in a county. Perhaps I
don't think you can go by that, because there's trees that are not harvested in Fulton County on a large scale, or I think Colquitt County received in the last 6-year period over $375,000 in severance tax to go back directly to the county,
Which would amount to about 3 miles of resurfacing.
3 miles?
Yeah.
Okay.
About 3 miles. The average cost of resurfacing in our county is 110,000 miles, 110,000 per mile.
Any other questions?
And another thing to keep in mind is the permit.
Hold on 1 second.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Watson, did you have another question?
Well, I was just going to follow up. I think my good friend from Colquitt County kind of mentioned it, and GDOT has mentioned this too as we move forward. Another one of the reasons this conversation came up was we're spending a lot of money on our roads and bridges right now, and we're fixing to start spending a lot more money on our roads and bridges, and we need to build them to handle our growing economies going forward. I hope 10 years from now we can be a different Georgia than we were today, and we need to work with the local governments on that to move forward to make sure that we build these bridges to withstand this kind of traffic and the roads as well.
Go ahead, Ms. Edwards.
And I would also add that the permit fees for the current increases in weights don't go to your local governments, they go to the state. And we'd be happy to work and continue future conversations in this, provide additional revenue sources. Both, we appreciate the T-SPLOS passage last year. Alone, that won't be enough. But look at other funding mechanisms by where we could perhaps bring them to future weight increases, which are likely to be advocated at the General Assembly.
Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the gentleman from Colquitt County, I'm over here. How many miles of road in Colquitt County is off limits to through truck traffic?
None that I'm aware of, sir.
None.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You're a big exception because most of us have tremendous amounts of county roads that are off limits to through trucks, which means that those people that have businesses in those counties are paying taxes to pave those roads, and they can't use them. So that was my point there, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there Kathy Clark here? Ms. Clark, I just have your name here. I don't know who you're with, but if you want to come on around, and you can tell us who you're with when you get up here. And let me say this, and I'm not fussing at Mr. Edwards about this, okay? But I have heard a couple of folks sort of complain about the process and the fact that they got a draft bill over the weekend and haven't had time. Well, folks, that's what the committee process is about. We had a study committee to delve in and figure out what the problems were with the original bill, to come up with suggestions, to come up with recommendations. And so the committee did its job in pointing out to the author the problems that it viewed with his proposal and coming up with suggestions, rather broad suggestions of what might work better. So I'm not gonna really be interested in hearing any more complaints about the committee process. If you don't like the process, then you can talk to me about that offline. Otherwise, let's just talk about the bill. All right, Ms. Clark.
Yes, sir.
Who are you with?
I am just a public citizen.
Great. Thank you for being here. You're welcome.
I'm not here today to speak on the technical aspects of this bill, but I'm here to speak on how the safety of the trucking industry has impacted my life. And on April 22nd, 2015, my whole world was torn apart. This is my daughter, Emily. And on April 22nd, she was killed in a wreck where a fully loaded tractor trailer traveling at 68 miles per hour ran over the top of her car and the vehicle in front of her. And those two vehicles were 7 Georgia Southern nursing students. Emily, McKay, Morgan, Caitlin, and Abby were killed in this horrific wreck on the last day of their clinical rotation for that semester. So first and foremost, I ask that whatever you're considering in this bill, you think about the safety of the traveling public of the state of Georgia so that no other family has to experience this type of loss. Thank you.
Ms. Clark, I'm very sorry for your loss, and thank you so much for being here. I know it's not easy for you to talk about this, and your family has been in our thoughts and prayers, and we all have heard of your tragedy, and very sorry for your loss. Thank you for being here today. Here, Mark Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mark Middleton. I'm here on behalf of AAA, and also I lobby for the Georgia Railroad Association. And you've heard from one of our members already, and you'll hear from some of our other members later as they talk specifically about some of the of the safety issues in regard to this bill. What I thought I would do, Mr. Chairman, if it suits you, is that I was going to look at the substitute. There are three major changes that the substitute makes that I wanted to point out to the committee. And often when a substitute is brought forward, it's in response to issues that are raised, as the chairman indicated, and we're very pleased that the proposed weight increases have been removed. I believe that was a result of the study committee work, the testimony that the subcommittee and later the committee heard from law enforcement and others, and so we're grateful for that. But I think there's a temptation sometimes to think that that there's a substitute may be some sort of compromise, and I think there's some severe problems with the substitute that I'd like to bring to your attention. Mr. Chairman, the first thing I'd like for you to look at is on line 16, and this has to do with the language change in regard to the forest products. And Mr. Chairman, in regard to your question earlier about whether forest products has been defined, I did see a definition in the code for raw forest products. I think it was over in Title 12 in Natural Resources, but I looked through the code and saw in the agricultural title, Title 2, and over in Title 40, which is motor vehicles, and everywhere that the term forest products was referenced, it seemed to be in regard to raw forest products. And so the concern that I have with the language that you see there on 16 is that not so much that it attempts to define the term forest products, but by changing that language from, quote, the forests were cut from the first point of origin, but changing it to the final point of marketing and processing, I do believe that opens that category up considerably. I think if you look back at one of the earlier versions of House Bill 411, the author and the proponents of the bill included wood pellets and a definition of wood pellets. And I believe the reason that they did that is that they realized that this language here in subsection A on 16 did not include that. It's intended to include logs. And I think with the changes that are proposed in the substitute, it's very clear to me that it is much, much broader than that. And not only is it to the final point of marketing, but it is to the final point of processing. So, I mean, whether, I saw Representative Harrell's comments earlier, it could include finished products. It could be anything that is a derivative of forest products. I don't believe that would be the intention of this committee, and it may or may not be the intention of the author, but I do believe it raises an issue. And of course, that means, if that is true, that you will be unleashing a whole new set of wholesalers and retailers out on the road with trucks that are larger than they currently are. And so we'll go from a scenario where the testimony over and over has been the purpose of the bill is to have less trucks on the road. And I think by any reasonable reading of that section and the others that I'm going to discuss, at the end of, if this bill were to pass, if this substitute were to pass, you would have more trucks going farther. And so that's completely the opposite of what was testified to both in the committee and in the subcommittee. On the next line, line 18, there's a single word added, the word peanuts, and I wish I could tell you what the effect of that is going to be, but as we all know, peanuts is one of the largest and most exported crops in Georgia. I know, speaking with my railroad hat on for a minute, that a lot of peanuts go in and out of the inland port, which is at Cordele, and it's not clear to me what the economic impact of allowing larger trucks to go farther hauling peanuts would be on the current marketplace. And so in terms of picking winners and losers, I think this would be a case where if the substitute were to pass, you would be picking a winner, and it would be the trucking industry over the Heart of Georgia Railroad, which is in Cordele, and I know we have the Southwest Georgia Railroad, which is over there as well. But I wish I could tell you what the impact of that single word peanuts would be, but clearly it would be very, very large. And finally, I can't improve upon what the colonel had to say about the 250-mile radius. I mean, just the stark description of the difference between going from the state line to Cordele and going from the state line here into the city is pretty stark. But if the purpose of changing from 100 to 250 was to be fair and to standardize it, I mean, currently what you have here in 32616G are 7 radiuses that apply to the various industries that receive a preference under this section. Right now, 7 of them, the radius is 100 miles, and one industry or one product, which is poultry waste, is 250 miles. So if you want to make it more fair, just change 250 back to 100, and you're treating everyone the same. So no one, to my knowledge, at the subcommittee meetings or before this committee has ever testified that they needed to take longer trips. In fact, you know, when Mr. Giles spoke and testified a few days ago, he was making the point that they were very short trips that he was looking to take from a feed location over to a processing location. And so the idea that you're going to take, I think it was his 1.4 million miles, and then that's limited currently by the 100-mile radius, and now goes to 250. You know, the potential is, you know, obviously, you know, 2.5 times of what it currently is, which is millions and millions of miles. And Mr. Chairman, I will speak to the process, but in a positive way. We took that process very seriously. I mean, both the GRA and AAA provided information. We focused on the issues related to weights, and we have attempted to put our hands on other information that relate to the things that have been raised just in the last couple of weeks, whether it's truck technology, whether it's road configuration, and these other things that have been raised. And both the rail industry and AAA have been involved with those issues at a federal level and have discussed those at a federal level, and we look forward to working with you again. So, you know, in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that the 2 groups that I represent, and I believe the coalition that you've heard from continually over time, we all continue to oppose 411 even in its substitute form, because at least with the previous versions, we felt like after all that year of study that we knew what the issues were. Now with adding peanuts, now with changing the scope of forestry products, and certainly by extending the radius from 100 miles to 250 miles, I don't know that any of us can quantify what the effect of that is. And so we look forward to continuing to work with this committee to try to deal with some of these issues. And as the transportation issues are addressed in the future, particularly as it relates to freight, we will be at your disposal, the committee's disposal, to provide whatever information that you find useful. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. If I can answer any questions, I'd be pleased to.
Thank you. Any questions? No questions. Thank you very much. Well, while we're talking about railroads, why don't we have Craig Camuso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, my name is Craig Camuso. I'm with CSX Transportation. You have heard from a couple of my cohorts with the railroad industry. CSX is what's considered a Class 1 railroad, along with Norfolk Southern, as opposed to our short line railroads. In Georgia, CSX has about 1,600 miles of track. We cover the state, basically, from South Georgia to North Georgia, from west to East Georgia. I speak today with, first of all thanks to Representative Watson and the work that he's done on this bill, his openness with it. We appreciate it very much, as well to those who have also advocated for 411. They've been very professional. We've had very open conversations, and they are friends of mine, and I appreciate and respect the work that they do. However, I do speak today in opposition to House Bill 411, and really it centers on 2 main issues. Number 1 is safety. In Georgia, you have about 6,000 grade crossings, not all on CSX, but in total about 6,000. About 2,000 of those are on CSX. These are crossings certainly that basically are roads, whether they be, for the most part, state roads, county roads, or city roads. By law, the railroad industry is required to maintain to a safe and reasonable standard those grade crossings. Now, we went through a bill about a dozen years ago in which we tried to define safe and reasonable, and as part of that process, subsequent to the bill's passage, we did a fair amount of studying along with the local governments as well as the Georgia DOT to really determine what tears up grade crossings. It was determined during that one of the primary causes for grade crossings deterioration is because of trucks, heavier trucks. And specifically, we were down in Richmond Hill, Georgia, where we witnessed how the trucks come down on them. Now, trucks aren't the sole reason, but they are a major reason. And when you talk about an industry, CSX, that invests over $100 million a year just to maintain our infrastructure, you're talking about a lot of money. Now, again, that is a responsibility that we have. So when we get phone calls or we're contacted about rough grade crossings, despite the fact that those crossings have been damaged by, for the most part, vehicular traffic and truck traffic, we still are responsible for going in and maintaining those. That's money that comes out of our bottom line, money that we could use to invest in infrastructure, in rail infrastructure. And the railroad industry is one of the most capital-intensive industries in the entire nation. And then the second and really most important reason for our concerns is safety. Over the last 10 years, we've had over 140 accidents involving tractor trailers. About 14 of those specifically were dealing with log trucks. And when you have a situation at a grade crossing, and I testified during the study committee that when I was hired, the people in my company said, your goal is to close every single grade crossing in the state. Now, they knew that wasn't going to happen, of course. But the point they were making is wherever there is a grade crossing, there is an opportunity for something bad to happen. Something bad to happen not only to the conductor and the engineer on that train, but also to the driver of that vehicle. And our concern for safety is not just with our employees, but it's also for the traveling public, including those truck drivers. So we maintain that safety certainly being at the forefront of our issues. As Mr. Middleton testified earlier, we look forward to continuing to work with the committee as this bill continues to be studied. And again, I'd like to thank Representative Watson for his work on the bill, and I'll yield any questions if there are any.
I've got a question for you. Maintaining grade crossings, it sounds like, is just a part of the business model for a train company, for a rail company. And that's the cost of doing business as a rail company. Is that fair to say?
It is. We have to work that into our budget yearly, yes.
And so tell me, what about this particular bill that we have before us makes that a more burdensome part of doing business in the state of Georgia?
Well, I think number one is the radius. Right now you have, as was recently testified, you have a 100-mile radius for one commodity. What the bill does propose, as I read it, would be to increase that radius for all commodities to 250 miles. So that's 150 extra miles.
Well, to be fair, for the commodities listed in the bill, not all commodities in the state.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Come on. Yes, sir. So a larger radius, and these are county roads, city roads, would mean where most of your grade crossings are. Obviously, we don't have grade crossings on highways, on I-85 and I-75. So there'll be more exposure to us at the local level.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Camuso? Thank you. Let's keep this train on the tracks and hear from Joel Harrell.
CSX and short rail.
Yeah, and now Norfolk Southern.
Mr. Chairman, I will yield my time. You can railroad.
All right. Thank you very much. Justin Kernan with GMA.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll be brief. A lot of things I was going to hit on were covered by either Colonel McDonough or Todd with ACCG, so I'm not going to reiterate many of those points. I would like to just start off by saying GMA is opposed to House Bill 411 even in this current form. And I want to go back to the fact that the legislature last session passed a transportation funding bill to help with our faltering infrastructure. And even though we're stating that all this bill does is create a 5% variance and also extends the radius, we feel that even that small task can actually further deteriorate our local roads. Public safety also must be paramount in this conversation and taken into consideration at all costs. We've had conversations, it was said earlier, that we don't know the impact. We don't know how much adding that weight how much more damage that could do to another vehicle in the case of an accident. Yes, it's true that 80,000 pounds is the current law. That 5% variance for some agricultural and forest products from the distance of origin could lead to greater deterioration. But my question is that distance of origin, or the point of origin, the way that we interpreted it. So before, it could be said that the point of origin is where the tree is cut, and then once it's delivered to the factory, that could be one of the manufacturing sites, but that's not the final. So if that product is leaving from that factory, does that start a new point of origin? So then you could possibly have an increased amount. And as Colonel McDonough pointed out, 250 miles is quite far. You can get from Cartersville all the way down to Moultrie, Rome to Albany, Atlanta to Valdosta, and from Macon you can get to any of our borders in that 250-mile radius. So you're opening up, and this isn't using the highway. These distances are using a local road. So we're opening up the most of the state to travel by these trucks that could be up to 84,000 pounds. And as Todd mentioned with ACCG, county roads are built at 56,000 pounds, or to handle 56,000 pounds. Municipal roads, some are a little higher, some are a little lower than that. So adding 2,000 pounds could be detrimental to a road that's not even meant to handle the current 80,000 pounds. We want to continue to have this conversation. We understand that these products are extremely vital to Georgia's economic success. We want to have the conversation, want to figure out how we can work together to move these products throughout our state and give them to our neighboring states. We just don't feel that 411 is the proper avenue to do that. That's all I have right now, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Al Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I honestly don't know, and I'm trying to figure. The vast majority of roads that come through cities, are they not county or state maintained?
Absolutely true.
Where loads that come through.
Absolutely true. Most of the roads are county or state, but they would be traveling on some roads that are operated by municipalities, and also on a public safety standpoint, some of those roads are actually protected by law enforcement agencies that are in cities.
Okay, because I was just wondering, because most of the roads I'm familiar with, either state maintained or county maintained when they come through cities.
We have the least amount of miles, but we still do have miles that we're responsible for.
Okay, you were one of the first people in Tifton, so you've been consistent.
There we go.
Any other questions for Mr. Kernan? Thank you, Mr. Kernan.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Matt Campbell. We're coming back to the railroads. I didn't know that.
Got to keep the wheels rolling.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Matt Campbell. I'm SMART Transportation Division, which is a railroad labor union. I come to speak to you today in the hopes of finding a safe solution, speaking on behalf of safety, not only railroad safety, but safety for the traveling public. we've heard a lot of numbers today and a lot of statistics or ratings and this and that. The only names we heard were of the beautiful young ladies, the Georgia Southern students who were lost all too soon. I'm going to give you a couple of names that are personal to me and the guys and gals that I work with. First is Mr. Bernie Smith, who was killed while driving a train in Nahunta, Georgia, Brantley County, when he collided with a log truck. Next is Mr. Jim Godwin, who had the same incident happen in Ludowici, Georgia. Personal to me because these guys worked with my father. Personal to me because when I hired out in 2000, which was 2 years after Mr. Godwin was killed by colliding with a log truck on a road that crossed a railroad track, I was warned and told, and everyone who works on the railroad who is in that operating cab, the engineers and conductors know that when you're going through the woods, whether it be in southeast Georgia, southwest Georgia, northeast Georgia, through the heart of Florida, that when you're going through the woods and you're approaching a crossing and you see any kind of truck, especially a log truck, approaching that crossing, that you tense up and you say your prayers because you've heard these stories. I named 2 people. The reason I know their names is because they worked on the same line that I've worked several times. That's just 2 out of the countless number that I could provide if needed at a later time. All that being said is safety is important. Safety of those log truck drivers is important. Safety of any truck driver is important. Safety of people driving railroad locomotives is important. And safety of anybody on the interstates and roads, county roads, whatever is important. And I'm asking for you to put the person, the safety of people first, on top of business, on top of increased production and numbers. Safety of people first. I yield to any questions.
Thank you. You don't appear to have any questions. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I've got a bit of a question here. I've got Louis Cooksey, Deputy Director from Gwinnett DOT, and Casey Snyder, Fire and EMS Chief from Gwinnett County. Are y'all together? Why don't y'all both come on up and we'll hear from y'all together. Oh, we saved the cartoons for the last. Almost last.
Mr. Chairman, while it's coming up, thank you for your time today. Thank you, representatives, members of the committee. We do appreciate you letting us speak for a few minutes, and we will try to be brief.
Yeah, on that point, before you get started, because I don't want to be disrespectful. It's 4:10 now. So we've got, and we're going to hear from GDOT after y'all. So if you can do it in 5 to 7 minutes, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
There are a few slides that I'll just skim through. They've been covered partly by other speakers today, and so I'll try to slide through those quickly.
Thank you.
Over the last 2 years, Gwinnett County has contributed $28 million in resurfacing on our county roads. This investment is made through county SPLOST tax dollars. The way we distribute this investment is we rate all of our roads from the first to the last, top to bottom. We rate every road. We have over 2,500 miles of road. And when we spend these tax dollars, we start at the bottom and we work our way up until we run out of money. The reason we're here today is that we're concerned about the influence of this bill on the status of our roads. Right now, we're able to hold our own, but it's very close. It's slim. The overall rating, the average rating, is not really going up or down. We're just holding our own. So with an increase in the load of the trucks, we are concerned that the wear and tear on the road system, even if it's just a few percent, would cause the quality of our roads to slide and deteriorate. So either we would need an influx of a higher investment, or we're going to have to allow quality to decrease. I'm just going to slide through this really quick. We have seen studies that show that increased loading does exponentially deteriorate the roads. That a 5% change doesn't mean that it's a 5% decrease in the quality of the road. It's exponential to that. Also, we're concerned about our bridges. That you've heard about bridge postings. We have over 180 bridges in Gwinnett County. We are concerned of how many of those we would have to either post or replace. We show pictures here of a typical bridge replacement, and it's at a cost of $3.7 million. And I'm not saying that we'd have to replace every bridge, but if we have 180 and we replace a significant portion of those bridges, you can add that up quickly. Also, we're concerned about the higher vertical loads. How are the loads going to be carried? Because of our horizontal curves on the roads, if the curves are designed for a specific vehicle at a specific speed, and so if the loads go higher, then are we going to have a rollover factor? And then, as we've heard earlier today about the concern on braking systems, and we're also concerned about what effect on accidents that may have, and I'm going to turn it over to Chief Snyder to discuss that.
Good afternoon, and I appreciate being here today. I'm Casey Snyder, the Fire Chief of Gwinnett County, and I just wanted to cover a couple of things on the accident pieces of it, and I think I can cut mine to about 2 slides and get us through this. This first slide I want to show you, and just the picture first on this one, is to look at and see the extensive amount that goes into a rescue like this with a tractor trailer. This is a car that had run up underneath of one. And what I will say about this is this goes way beyond just the jaws of life. This takes a lot more extrication work and a lot more skill sets to be able to pull these off. This next slide, and this is where I'm primarily going to talk about, these are very difficult extrications, and I don't care what jurisdiction you're from or what facilities or what resources you have. This first one on the right is a rollover of where a truck had driven over the top of a car. The extrication taking place there. The second one is a rollover where it rolled over and crushed a car. And this third one over here is a tractor trailer wreck that occurred last year, July of last year in Gwinnett County at the intersection of 316 and Collins Hill, and this is right in front of Georgia Gwinnett College. A couple things about that call on the bottom with the login truck. This incident took a total of 3 hours for us to get through. It required an engine, a squad, which is a manpower unit, and a specialty unit for us, a hazmat unit, and a med unit, a total of 11 firefighters for 3 hours to extricate this. In addition to this one, we also had a fuel spill with this that required special intervention to keep diesel fuel from getting into a nearby creek. And certainly when we have accidents involving tractor trailers, not just logging trucks, saddle tanks are certainly something we deal with on a pretty consistent basis. The other thing I want to make a point on are our safety designs. I've been doing this now for 32 years. Certainly safety glass was in place in vehicles when I started, but we still saw some that didn't, and you saw graphically why. We've also had airbags, compartmentalized into cars, seatbelt laws, and all those work great. There is nothing in a car when you get a truck that rolls over the top of you or a truck that rolls over on top of your car that can protect the occupants. None of those will do any good for the occupants that are inside. So with those comments, I would like to tell you, from our Gwinnett County's perspective and from ACG's perspective, we are against this bill.
Any questions? All right, thank you, gentlemen, very much. And the last speakers we have listed for today are Josh Waller and Meg Perkle from GDOT.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I also want to introduce Meg Perkle, our chief engineer. And for the sake of brevity, I think we're just going to walk through this PowerPoint that you have in front of you and take any questions that you might have as we sort of wrap up. And obviously the hour is kind of getting long. But basically, we've heard a lot of discussion about the issue of parity when it comes to this part of the statute and commodities. And I thought it would be good to provide you with a historical context of this code section over the last 20 years. So as you turn to that first slide, shows prior to 1995 the commodities that were listed. All of them were restricted to the county they were in, or the neighboring county. Included forest products, live poultry, feed, and granite. Then when you go to 1995, you have the commodities increased to 80,000. You had all the restrictions on travel eliminated in terms of from the adjoining county, and it added cotton. Then 1996, they added solid waste. 2002, they allowed for 46,000 pounds on a tandem. Then they also added concrete with the distance restriction. And then they included, they brought in from the other section the consideration that you can't use a lift axle for purposes of calculating the total gross weight available. Then in 2004, they added raw ore and minerals were added. Then we get to 2005. You can see where the distance restriction was loosened on timber. And then this is where you see the first appearance of the 5% variance. And so this is what allowed them to go to 84,000 pounds. In this case, it was the first three commodities: forest products, poultry, and feed. And they were fined back in that case to 80,000. The rationale, as I understand at the time, was that you're not incenting someone to load to 84,000 pounds. The goal is still 80,000 pounds with a variance to allow, just in case, for all the considerations, you're in the woods or somewhere you might not have the precise way to measure, to give that variance in place. So ultimately, at the end of the day, that's why they were fined back to 80,000. Then you go to 2006. You have aggregates added with no district restriction, and you bring in you've got the 100-mile radius. And then in 2007, we have we bring in the sort of twofold. You have the current commodities that were that were being fined back to 80,000 are now given exemption to go just to 84,000 when they're fined. And then you have sort of a second tier of commodities that are fined back to 80,000. And then it also added granite as one of the commodities with the 5% variance. 2008, it eliminates the distance restriction on concrete and allowed it to be part of the 5% variance. And then in 2011, we see the addition of chicken litter as an eligible commodity. And you have all the remaining commodities put into the exemption or the 5% variance. And then chicken litter is in a separate variance, and it's fined back to 80,000, but it's allowed the 250-mile radius. The other commodities are fined back to 84,000, but they're only allowed to go 100-mile radius. So the last one is the most recent substitute today. As you can see, that it basically, by combining the two variance tolerances, that you take sort of the best scenarios from both, allows all the commodities to only be fined back to 84,000 and increases it to 250 miles, as well as adding in cotton and loosening sort of the restrictions on the movement of timber, and adds peanuts as well. I think the thing to bring here is, as you look back over the history of this code section, we hear a lot of discussion about parity. But every time we've sort of tried to address a disparity, we just set up the next conversation for an additional change to the statute. And each and every time we do this, we are adding heavier trucks to the road that are going a longer distance. And ultimately, that gets back to the subsidy the state has to provide, that Georgia taxpayers provide to taking care of those roads, and just understanding what's the right balance. So it's certainly something the department would ask you to consider and look at. We have our reservations and are actually opposed to the underlining substitute for that reason. But certainly we would just encourage a continued thoughtful approach to this, and maybe even taking a more systemic look at how we address these commodity exemptions.
All right. You have a question from Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes things are not as they appear to be. tell me what chicken litter is. I got a good idea. 80,000 pounds is a whole lot of stuff.
It's something that comes from chicken you don't fry. How about that?
I've just never seen 8,000 pounds at one time. Thank God.
I'm sure you wouldn't want to smell 80,000 pounds either.
Well, I have.
That's a lot of chicken.
And as Mr. Massey and I have talked before about my days shoveling at Phildale Farms in Gainesville, I've seen lots of pounds of chicken refuse. So anyway, other questions? Mr. Watson.
Just thinking, this is good information there, Josh. I was just curious. I mean, how much of this do you think is related to our changing economies, our growing economies? I mean, Georgia, is just recently named the #1 place to do business, and if everything was exactly like it was prior to 1995, where would we be economically as a state? Obviously, there's been a lot of changes along the way, but I think as our economies change and things change, we have to change and adapt with it, and I think that's why you've seen that over the years through this. But I like this. It's good information. Thank you.
Certainly, we acknowledge the need and certainly promote economic growth in the state. And I think the only comment I'd add to that is, in highlighting this, is that you probably need a more systemic look. As you look at each and every year, it's a little bit more of a one-off and sort of tweaking the code here to there. And again, we would just sort of encourage sort of a holistic review if we're going to just the recommendation of the department to do that. So.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
The only thing, if I can answer, if we're talking about the prior substitute, the question came up about postings, and just to clarify that, had the prior substitute been up, it would have resulted in an additional 240 bridges being posted. And based off the calculations, we have our state bridge engineer here as well, Bill Duvall. They actually can calculate the detour of the truck, and in some cases you would have trucks that would have to detour about 50 miles because that bridge being posted.
But to be clear, that's under the old bill, not under
Correct.
the current.
I know the question
bill.
Correct.
Okay.
The question got raised prior that there was not clarity about postings, and I just wanted to make sure we addressed that for anyone, since the question
So
was
the
raised.
current bill, were it to become effective, to your knowledge, would not affect postings?
Doesn't impact postings.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. All right, let me, in wrapping up, let me tell you the plan for the committee going forward. At this point, we'll plan to have our regular meeting on Thursday, from 2 to 4, and at that time, if it will be, we'll have an opportunity for the committee to discuss and debate the bill. And if members want to have amendments and substitutions, then those should be presented to the committee as soon as possible if you can. But we'll certainly entertain motions and amendments and try to have some action on this bill on Thursday. We'll probably have another bill in this committee on that day related to tow trucks, and so we'll probably have 2 bills on Thursday. As far as I know, that's all we'll have. All right, meeting's adjourned.